Some days start with coffee. Others start with catastrophe. That Tuesday morning started with both, and looking back, I should have known it was going to be one of those days that changes everything. The kind of day where a simple plumbing job turns into something you never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., same as always. I'd been getting up at that hour for the past 8 years, ever since I started my handyman business after getting laid off from the manufacturing plant. The routine never changed. Black coffee, toast, with peanut butter, check the weather, load the truck, and hit the road before most people even think about opening their eyes. The coffee maker gurgled to life while I stood at my kitchen window, watching the streetlights flicker off one by one as dawn crept over Millbrook Heights. It's a decent neighborhood, not fancy, but the kind of place where people take care of their lawns and wave when they see you coming home from work. I'd lived in the same duplex for 12 years, and in all that time, I'd fixed just about everything that could break in a 3-mile radius. My name's David Chen, and at 43, I've learned that most problems can be solved with the right tool and enough patience. People call me when their garbage disposal sounds like it's grinding rocks, when their deck stairs wobble, or when their bathroom faucet decides to become a fountain at 2 in the morning. I'm not the cheapest guy in town, but I show up when I say I will, and I don't leave until the job's done right. The phone rang while I was buttering my toast. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street, panic in her voice about her washing machine flooding her basement. I told her I'd be there by 8, grabbed my toolbox, and headed out into the morning chill. October in Illinois means layers, and I'd learned to dress for spending half the day in unheated basements and crawl spaces. My truck, a 2018 Ford F-150, with more dents than I care to count, started on the second try. The radio crackled to life with the local news. Something about the school board meeting, a new traffic light going up on Main Street, and the weather forecast calling for rain by evening. I half-listened while mentally running through what I'd need for Mrs. Patterson's problem. Washing machine floods usually meant a busted hose or a clogged drain, neither of which should take more than an hour to fix. The Patterson job turned out to be exactly what I expected. A rubber hose had given up after 15 years of faithful service, sending water across half the basement floor. Mrs. Patterson hovered nearby, wringing her hands and apologizing for calling so early, while I swapped out the hose and showed her how to check for wear next time. She insisted on paying me $20 more than my usual rate and sent me off with a thermos of coffee that was actually better than what I make at home. By 9:30, I was back in the truck, checking my phone for messages. 3 missed calls, all from the same number I didn't recognize. When it rang again, I answered on the second ring. Chen Home Repair, this is David. Oh, thank goodness. The voice was crisp, professional, with just a hint of frustration. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. I got your number from Janet Morrison on Pine Street. She said you fixed her kitchen sink last month. That's right. What can I help you with? It's my kitchen sink. The faucet just died. Completely. No water at all, and I have a dinner party tonight for 8 people. I'm desperate. I glanced at my schedule, scribbled on a napkin from yesterday's lunch. I can be there around 11 if that works. What's the address? 47 Oak Ridge Drive. I'm Sarah Coleman, and I'll pay double your usual rate if you can get it working before this afternoon. Oak Ridge Drive. That was the nice part of town. Up in the hills where the houses had 3-car garages and mailboxes that cost more than some people's monthly rent. I'd worked in that neighborhood a few times, usually on recommendation from previous customers. The people up there were polite enough, but they had a way of making you feel like the help, if you know what I mean. Double won't be necessary, ma'am. I charge fair rates for good work. I'll see you at 11. The drive up Oak Ridge took me through downtown Millbrook, past the diner where I grab lunch most days, past the hardware store where old Pete Henderson still remembers when you could buy a decent wrench for $5. The houses got bigger as the road climbed, with lawns that looked like golf courses and driveways that could park a small convention. Number 47 was a 2-story colonial with shutters the color of forest green and a front porch that wrapped around half the house. The driveway was brick, laid in a herringbone pattern that probably cost more than I made in a month. I parked my beat-up truck next to a silver BMW that looked like it had just rolled off the showroom floor and checked my appearance in the side. Mirror. Clean shirt, work boots that weren't too scuffed, and my hair doing that thing where it sticks up in the back no matter how much I comb it. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. The woman standing there was tall, maybe 5'8", with shoulder-length brown hair that had silver streaks running through it like someone had painted them there on purpose. She was wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that looked expensive but not flashy, and when she smiled, I noticed she had laugh lines around her eyes. "You must be David. I'm Sarah Coleman. Thank you so much for coming on such short notice." Her handshake was firm, confident, the kind of grip that said she was used to getting things done. She led me through a foyer with hardwood floors that gleamed like they'd been polished that morning, past a living room with furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and into a kitchen that was bigger than my entire downstairs. The kitchen was all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, with a center island that could seat 4 people comfortably. Everything was spotless except for a stack of vegetables on the cutting board and what looked like the beginnings of soup preparation spread across the counter. "The faucet just stopped working this morning," Sarah said, gesturing toward the sink. "I turned it on to fill a pot, and nothing, not even a drip." I set my toolbox down and examined the faucet. It was one of those high-end models with a pull-out spray head, probably cost more than I made in a week. I tried turning the handles, checked under the sink for obvious problems, and ran through the mental checklist I'd developed over years of troubleshooting. "When's the last time you had any plumbing work done?" I asked, crouching down to get a better look at the shut-off valves. "About 6 months ago. We had the guest bathroom renovated, but that's upstairs. This has been working fine until today." I opened my toolbox and pulled out a flashlight. The space under the sink was organized with the kind of precision that suggested Sarah Coleman didn't tolerate clutter anywhere in her house. Cleaning supplies lined up by height, a small fire extinguisher mounted to the cabinet wall, and not a single spider web in sight. "Mind if I ask what you do for work?" I said, more to make conversation than anything else. People usually relaxed when you got them talking about themselves, and a relaxed customer was easier to work with. "I'm a financial advisor. Have my own practice downtown. What about you? How long have you been doing this?" 8 years in business for myself, but I've been fixing things since I was a kid. My dad taught me that if something's broken, you figure out how to fix it rather than throwing it away. She leaned against the counter, watching me work. That's becoming a rare philosophy these days. Most people just replace everything. I found the problem pretty quickly. The supply lines under the sink had come loose, probably from vibration over time. Simple fix. But it required getting into an awkward position with my head practically inside the cabinet. I could feel Sarah watching as I worked, not hovering exactly, but paying attention in a way that made me conscious of doing the job right. "You're very thorough," she said, after I'd tested the connections twice to make sure they'd hold. "Measure twice, cut once." My dad used to say that about everything, not just carpentry. I turned the water back on and checked for leaks. There's nothing worse than thinking you fixed something only to have it break again the next day. The faucet came to life with a satisfying whoosh of water pressure. I let it run for a minute, testing both hot and cold, making sure the spray function worked properly. Everything looked good. "That should do it," I said, wiping my hands on a shop rag. The supply lines had worked themselves loose over time. I tightened them up and replaced a couple of washers that were looking worn. Should be good for years. Sarah turned the faucet on and off several times, testing the spray head, smiling like I'd just performed magic. "You make it look so easy." Most things are easy once you know what you're looking for. The trick is knowing where to look. I packed my tools back into their designated spots in the box, a habit that had served me well over the years. "That'll be $75. She disappeared into another room and came back with her checkbook. I meant what I said about paying double. "You saved my dinner party. 75 is fair. I was up here anyway, and it only took 20 minutes. She wrote the check, but held on to it for a moment before handing it over. "Can I ask you something? Do you always work this hard for a simple service call? I mean, you tested everything twice, explained what you were doing, cleaned up after yourself. Most repair people I've dealt with barely do the minimum." I shrugged. "I don't know any other way to do it. If you're going to do something, might as well do it right." She handed me the check, and our fingers brushed for just a second. At 55, I've never met someone who works so hard for something so straightforward. You could have been in and out in 10 minutes. There was something in the way she said it, not like she was impressed with my work ethic, but like she was genuinely puzzled by it, like she'd encountered something rare and wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Quality takes time, I said, which was what I always said when customers commented on my thoroughness. Besides, cutting corners just means I'll be back here next month fixing whatever I didn't do right the first time. She walked me to the front door, and I noticed she moved with the kind of confidence that came from being successful at whatever she did. Not arrogant, just sure of herself in a way that suggested she was used to making decisions and having them work out. Thank you again, David. I'll definitely keep your number. Happy to help. Enjoy your dinner party. I was halfway to my truck when she called out from the doorway. David, that thing you said about your father, about fixing things instead of throwing them away, does that apply to more than just plumbing? I turned back, not sure what she was getting at. I suppose it applies to most things. Why? She smiled. But there was something thoughtful behind it, like she was working through a problem in her head. Just curious. Drive safely. The rest of the day played out like most of my Tuesdays. A loose railing for the Hendersons on Maple Street, a squeaky door hinge for old Mr. Kowalski, and a garage door opener that had decided to retire without notice for a young couple who'd just moved to town. Normal problems with normal solutions. The kind of work that paid the bills and kept me busy. But I kept thinking about what Sarah Coleman had said. At 55, she'd never met someone who worked so hard for something so straightforward. There was something about the way she'd said it that stuck with me, like she wasn't just talking about sink repair, like she was talking about something bigger, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. By 6 o'clock, I was back home, washing the day's grime off my hands and thinking about what to have for dinner. The local news was on in the background, the same mix of local politics and weather updates that filled every evening broadcast. I wasn't really listening until they mentioned Oak Ridge Drive. The annual Millbrook Community Foundation fundraiser will be held this Saturday at the Coleman residence on Oak Ridge Drive. The event, hosted by local financial advisor Sarah Coleman, has raised over $200,000 for local charities. Over the past 5 years, I looked up from the sandwich I was making. Sarah Coleman. The same Sarah Coleman whose sink I'd fixed that morning was apparently some kind of community pillar, the type of person who hosted charity fundraisers and got mentioned on the evening news. It explained the house, the BMW, the way she carried herself like someone used to being in charge. What it didn't explain was why she'd seemed so surprised by someone doing their job properly, or why that comment about working hard had felt like more than just small talk. There had been something else in her voice, something that suggested she wasn't just talking about plumbing. I finished my sandwich and tried to put it out of my mind. She was a customer, I'd fixed her sink, and that was the end of it. In my line of work, you meet all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. Some of them stick in your memory longer than others, but that doesn't mean anything beyond the fact that everyone's got their own story. Still, as I settled in to watch the game, I found myself wondering what kind of story someone like Sarah Coleman might have, and why someone who seemed to have everything figured out would be surprised by a little honest work. 3 days later, I was elbow deep in replacing a water heater for the Petersons when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it, given that I was lying on my back in a cramped basement with a wrench in one hand and a flashlight between my teeth. But the caller ID showed a number I recognized. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. David, it's Sarah Coleman. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I spit the flashlight into my hand and wiped sweat from my forehead. Just wrestling with a water heater, but I can talk. What can I do for you? Well, this is going to sound strange, but my garbage disposal has started making this awful grinding noise. I know you were just here, and I hate to bother you again so soon, but my dinner party last night was such a success that I'm hosting another gathering this weekend, and say no more. I can swing by tomorrow morning if that works. There was a pause. You don't even know what I'm willing to pay yet. Same rate as always. If it's a quick fix, it's a quick fix. If it needs parts, we'll figure it out. You really don't operate like other contractors, do you? I laughed. I wouldn't know. I've never been anyone else. The next morning found me back in the driveway of 47 Oak Ridge Drive, But this time the BMW had company. A red Lexus sat next to it, and I could hear voices coming from the backyard. I rang the doorbell and waited, listening to what sounded like a heated discussion about municipal zoning laws. Sarah opened the door wearing jeans and a blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than I remembered. Perfect timing. I just sent my early morning committee meeting to the backyard with coffee and pastries. Come on in. She led me through the house again, but this time I noticed details I'd missed before. Family photos lined the hallway, showing Sarah with various people at what looked like graduations, vacations, and formal events. In the kitchen, the garbage disposal was indeed making a sound like rocks in a blender. Started yesterday evening. Right after my guests left, Sarah said, wincing as I flipped the switch to demonstrate the problem. I thought maybe something fell down there, but I can't see anything. I turned off the power and grabbed my tools. Mind if I ask what kind of committee meets at 8 in the morning on a Thursday? Hospital board. We're trying to get funding. Approved for a new pediatric wing, and the only time all 7 of us can meet is at dawn or midnight. Dawn seemed more civilized. I disconnected the disposal and peered inside with my flashlight. You're on the hospital board too? Along with the charity fundraising? Among other things. She leaned against the counter, watching me work. What about you? Besides fixing everyone's problems, what do you do in your spare time? Mostly, I fix my own problems. My duplex is about 90 years old, so there's always something. I found the culprit. A small metal object wedged between the grinding teeth. Looks like a twist tie got down here somehow. These things can jam up the whole mechanism. A twist tie? That's what's been making that horrible noise? Amazing how something so small can cause such a big problem. I worked the metal free and checked the grinding chamber for damage. Sometimes the simplest things are what trip us up. As I reassembled the disposal, voices from the backyard grew louder. I caught fragments of conversation about budget allocations and construction timelines, delivered in the kind of professional tone that suggested these people were used to making decisions that affected other people's lives. Sounds like serious business out there, I said, testing the disposal. It hummed smoothly, no grinding or rattling. They're good people, but they all think their way is the only way to get things done. Sometimes I feel like a referee more than a board member. Sarah tried the disposal herself, smiling when it worked perfectly. How do you do that? Make it look so effortless? Practice, I guess. Plus, I've learned that most problems have simpler solutions than people think. We just make them complicated because we're looking for complicated answers. She turned off the disposal and looked at me with that same expression from our first meeting, like she was trying to figure something out. Can I ask you something? Personal? Shoot. Have you always been this steady? I mean, you show up when you say you will, you do exactly what you promise, you don't overcharge or oversell. Where I come from, that's unusual. I finished packing my tools, thinking about how to answer that. My dad worked at the grain elevator for 38 years. Same job, same shift, same lunch pail every day. He used to tell me that a man's word is the only thing that's truly his, so he better make sure it means something. What happened to him? Cancer, about 10 years ago. But he worked right up until the last month, because he said his replacement needed time to learn the job properly. I snapped the toolbox shut. Guess some of that rubbed off on me. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe I'd shared too much. People usually didn't want to hear about your dead parents when you were fixing their appliances. But when she looked up, there was something soft in her expression. He sounds like a good man. He was. Taught me that how you do anything is how you do everything. The back door opened and a woman in a navy business suit poked her head in. Sarah, we need you to settle a disagreement about the construction timeline. Be right there, Janet. Sarah turned back to me. I should get back to my committee. What do I owe you? $45. It was just the twist tie. She wrote another check, but this time she didn't try to pay extra. David, can I ask you something else? Sure. Do you ever get tired of fixing things for other people? I mean, don't you ever want to build something that's yours? The question caught me off guard. It was exactly the kind of thing I'd been thinking about more often. Lately, lying awake at night wondering if I'd still be crawling under other people's sinks when I was 60. Sometimes, I admitted. I've always thought about building my own place someday. Nothing fancy, just something I designed and built from the ground up. What's stopping you? I shrugged. Time, money, the usual suspects. Plus, I'm pretty good at fixing things. Building from scratch is a different skill set. But you'd want to try it? Maybe. Someday. She handed me the check, and again our fingers touched briefly when I took it. You know, I'm always looking for investment opportunities for my clients. Things like real estate development, construction projects. If you ever get serious about that building idea, I'd be interested in hearing about it. I wasn't sure if she was being polite or if she actually meant it. I'll keep that in mind. I mean it, David. I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've learned to recognize potential when I see it. Janet appeared in the doorway again, this time with an expression that suggested the committee was getting restless. Sarah, they're about to start voting without you. Coming. Sarah walked me to the front door, but stopped before opening it. I know this sounds strange, but would you be interested in coming to my fundraiser this Saturday? It's not really your scene, probably, but I'd like you to meet some people. I looked down at my work clothes, then back at her. I'm not really the charity gala type. It's not a gala. It's a backyard barbecue that happens to raise money for good causes. Very casual, no tuxedos required, she smiled. Besides, half the people there probably need handyman work done at some point. Could be good for business. You don't have to invite the help to your parties, you know. Her expression changed, becoming more serious. Is that what you think this is about? I realized I'd said the wrong thing. I just meant... I know what you meant, and for the record, I don't think of you as the help. I think of you as someone who does what he says he's going to do, which is rarer than you might think in my world. There was an awkward moment where neither of us knew what to say. Finally, she opened the door. The invitation stands if you change your mind. Starts at 2 o'clock, and you can park anywhere along the street. I was halfway down the front steps when she called after me. David, that thing about building your own place, you should do it. Life's too short to spend it all fixing other people's problems. The drive back to my next appointment took me past the elementary school where kids were outside for recess, screaming and running around like tiny maniacs. I stopped at the red light and watched them play, thinking about what Sarah had said. Life's too short to spend it all fixing other people's problems. The thing was, I liked fixing problems. There was something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again, about leaving a place better than you found it. But lately, I'd started wondering if there was more to life than service calls and repair bills. My next job was at the Kowalski house, where Mr. Kowalski's kitchen faucet had developed a drip that was keeping him awake at night. He was 84 and had lived in the same house for 57 years, and he met me at the door with a cup of coffee and a detailed explanation of everything he'd tried to fix the problem himself. I can still do most things, he said, watching me work. But these old hands aren't as steady as they used to be. Nothing wrong with knowing when to call for help, I said, replacing a worn washer. That's wisdom, not weakness. You remind me of my son-in-law, Tommy. Good worker, honest man. He's got his own construction company down in Springfield now, builds custom homes for people with more money than sense. Custom homes, huh? That sounds like interesting work? Mr. Kowalski nodded. Says the hardest part isn't the building, it's dealing with the customers. Everyone thinks they know better than the guy who's been doing it for 20 years. I tested the faucet. The drip was gone, and the water pressure was strong and steady. There you go, Mr. K. Should be quiet enough for you to sleep now. He insisted on paying me in cash and walking me to the door, even though I told him he didn't need to get up. You know, David, I've been watching you work around this neighborhood for years. You've got good hands and a good head on your shoulders. Don't waste them on small jobs forever. What do you mean? I mean, there's nothing wrong with fixing sinks and unclogging drains. But a man with your skills could build something that lasts. Something bigger than a repair bill. It was the second time that day someone had suggested I was capable of more than what I was doing. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. The rest of the afternoon was routine. A sticky door for the Martinez family, a broken step for Mrs. Chen on Birch Street, and a garage door adjustment for a new couple who'd just bought their first house. Normal problems, normal solutions, the kind of work that filled my days and paid my bills. But I kept thinking about what Sarah and Mr. Kowalski had said, and about the way Sarah had looked when she asked if I ever got tired of fixing other people's problems. Like she understood something about that feeling. Like maybe she'd asked herself the same question. That evening, I sat on my back deck with a beer and looked at the duplex I'd been renting for 12 years. It was a solid building, well maintained, but it wasn't mine. Every improvement I made benefited someone else. Every repair I did was just maintenance on someone else's investment. For the first time in a long while, I found myself sketching on the back of an envelope. Nothing elaborate, just the outline of a small house with a front porch and a 2-car garage. The kind of place a man could build with his own hands if he had the time and the courage to try. I was still sketching when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah Coleman's number. "I hope I'm not calling too late," she said. "I just wanted to apologize for that comment about the help. That came out wrong." "You don't need to apologize. I probably overreacted." "No, you didn't. I spend so much time in business mode that I sometimes forget how things sound. The truth is, I invited you because I genuinely enjoyed talking with you, not because you fixed my sink, but because of how you fixed it." I set down my pencil. "How do you mean?" "Most people do the minimum required to get paid and move on. You do the work like it matters, like you take pride in it. That's not common in any profession, let alone one where you mostly deal with emergencies and frustrated customers." "I never thought about it that way." "Well, maybe you should. And maybe you should also think about that house you want to build." I meant what I said about investment opportunities. After we hung up, I sat there looking at my rough sketch until the mosquitoes drove me inside. For the first time in years, I went to bed thinking about something other than tomorrow's repair schedule. I thought about what it might feel like to build something from the ground up. Something that would last long after I was gone. Something that was mine. Saturday afternoon found me standing in front of my closet, staring at clothes I hadn't worn in months. The fundraiser invitation had been nagging at me all week, and I'd finally decided to go, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was curiosity about Sarah's world, or maybe it was Mr. Kowalski's words about not wasting good hands on small jobs forever. I settled on khakis and a blue button-down shirt that my sister had bought me last Christmas, claiming it brought out my eyes. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself without work boots and a tool belt. The guy staring back looked like he might actually belong at a backyard barbecue with financial advisors and hospital board members. Oak Ridge Drive was lined with cars when I arrived, forcing me to park 3 blocks away. I could hear music and laughter floating from Sarah's backyard, the kind of comfortable noise that comes from people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. For a moment, I sat in my truck, second-guessing the decision to come. These weren't my people, and this wasn't my scene. But then I remembered the way Sarah had looked when she invited me, like it actually mattered to her whether I showed up. That got me out of the truck and walking toward the house. The front door was open, with a handwritten sign directing people around to the back. I followed the brick path along the side of the house, past perfectly manicured flower beds and a small garden fountain that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The backyard was even more impressive than I'd imagined, with mature oak trees providing shade over a space that could easily hold 50 people. Sarah had transformed her yard into something between a summer party and a small festival. String lights hung between the trees, tables covered with white cloths held silent auction items, and a local bluegrass band was set up near the back fence. The smell of barbecue filled the air, and people moved easily between conversation clusters, drinks in hand, everyone looking relaxed and genuinely happy to be there. I spotted Sarah near the food table, wearing a yellow sundress and talking animatedly with a group of people I didn't recognize. She looked different in her own space, more relaxed, like the professional armor she wore during business meetings had been set aside for the afternoon. When she caught sight of me, her face lit up with a smile that made the awkwardness of parking 3 blocks away seem worth it. "David, you came." She excused herself from her conversation and walked over, her enthusiasm genuine. "I wasn't sure you would." Neither was I, to be honest. But I figured I should see what all the fuss was about. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people. But first, get yourself something to eat. The brisket is incredible, and the potato salad is my grandmother's recipe." She led me through the crowd, stopping every few feet to introduce me to someone new. There was Dr. Williams from the hospital, who turned out to be a surprisingly funny guy with strong opinions about baseball. Margaret Chen, who ran the local food bank, and immediately started asking about my availability for volunteer construction work. Tom Bradley, a retired teacher who'd built his own deck last summer and wanted tips on how to keep it from warping. What surprised me was how normal everyone was. I'd expected stuffiness, the kind of polite conversation that happens when people are more interested in being seen than actually connecting. Instead, I found myself talking with people who seemed genuinely interested in what I did, who asked thoughtful questions about construction and home repair, who treated me like someone worth knowing rather than just someone who fixed their sinks. "You're not what I expected," said a woman named Linda Foster, who worked at the bank downtown. "Sarah said you were the best handyman in town, but she didn't mention you were so easy to talk to. What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more rough around the edges, I guess. My last contractor barely spoke English and left sawdust in places I'm still finding 6 months later." I was about to respond when Sarah appeared at my elbow with 2 bottles of beer. "Linda, are you interrogating my guest?" "Just getting to know him. I might need some work done on my kitchen cabinets." "Well, you're in luck. David doesn't just fix things. He actually cares about doing them right." Sarah handed me a beer and touched my arm lightly. "Come on, there's someone I want you to meet." She led me toward a quieter corner of the yard where a man in his 60s was sitting alone, watching the crowd with amused detachment. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt, and something about his posture suggested he was more comfortable observing than participating. "David, I'd like you to meet Robert Henley. Bob's a retired engineer who designed half the bridges in this county. Bob, this is David Chen, the man I was telling you about." Bob stood up and extended his hand. His grip was firm, calloused in a way that suggested he'd done his share of actual work. "Sarah says you're thinking about building your own place." "Just thinking at this point. It's probably more dream than plan." "Dreams are where all good projects start." Bob gestured for us to sit down at a nearby table. "What kind of place are you envisioning?" For the next 20 minutes, Bob and I talked about construction methods, building codes, and the challenges of designing a house from scratch. He listened carefully to my ideas, asked intelligent questions, and offered insights that came from decades of experience with structural engineering. Sarah sat quietly, occasionally adding a comment but mostly just listening to us talk. "You know," Bob said finally, "there's a piece of land about 10 miles south of town that might interest you. 5 acres, good well water, already has power running to it. The owner's been trying to sell it for 2 years, but it's too remote for most people and too small for developers." "What's wrong with it?" I asked. "Nothing's wrong with it. It's just not what most people want. But for someone looking to build a custom home, someone who doesn't mind being a little off the beaten path, it could be perfect." Sarah leaned forward. "How much land are we talking about?" 5 acres, like I said. Enough for a house, a good-sized workshop, maybe a garden. The owner's asking 120, but I bet he'd take 90 if someone made a serious offer." I nearly choked on my beer. $90,000? For 5 acres with utilities? "That's actually reasonable for this area," Sarah said, "especially if it's in good condition." "I don't have $90,000, I said, stating what seemed obvious. Bob smiled. "Son, nobody has that kind of money lying around. That's what banks are for. Banks don't loan money to handymen who want to build dream houses. They loan money to people with good credit, steady income, and solid business plans," Sarah said quietly. "Which, from what I can tell, describes you perfectly." I looked at her, then at Bob, then back at Sarah. They were both serious, talking about this like it was actually possible instead of just wishful thinking. "You really think I could qualify for that kind of loan?" "I think you're underestimating yourself," Sarah said. "You've been running a successful business for 8 years. You have satisfied customers throughout this entire area. You show up, do quality work, and charge fair prices. That's exactly what banks want to see." The conversation was interrupted by the band striking up a new song, something slow and melodic that drew couples onto the makeshift dance floor near the back fence. I watched them for a moment, thinking about everything Bob and Sarah had just said. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Sarah. "Of course. Why are you so interested in whether I build a house or not? I mean, you barely know me." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the dancers move slowly in the fading afternoon light. Do you know what I do all day, David? You're a financial advisor. I manage other people's money. I help them plan for retirement, save for their kids' college, invest in mutual funds and bond portfolios. It's good work, important work, but it's all theoretical. Numbers on paper, projections and percentages and pie charts. She turned to look at me directly. But what you do is real. When you fix someone's sink, they can turn on the faucet and water comes out. When you repair a door, it opens and closes properly. You solve actual problems for actual people, and at the end of the day, you can point to something and say, I made that work. So I've spent my entire career helping other people achieve their dreams while putting my own on hold. I've got more money than I know what to do with. But I can't remember the last time I built something with my own hands, or took a real risk on something that mattered. Bob had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. What Sarah's trying to say is that watching someone else chase their dreams can be almost as satisfying as chasing your own. Is that what this is about? I asked. Living vicariously through the working class guy? Sarah's expression changed, becoming more intense. No, David. This is about recognizing potential when I see it, and about believing that good people deserve good things even when they don't believe it themselves. The weight of her words settled over the table like a blanket. I could feel Bob watching us, probably recognizing something that I was still trying to understand. You really think I could do it? I asked. Build a house from scratch? I think you could do anything you set your mind to, Sarah said simply. The question is whether you want to badly enough to take the risk. What kind of risk are we talking about? Bob leaned back in his chair. Well, there's the financial risk, obviously. Even with a loan, you'd need money for materials, permits, unexpected problems. Probably looking at 6 months to a year of construction. Time, assuming you do most of the work yourself. And there's the risk of failure, Sarah added. What if you start and can't finish? What if you run out of money or time or energy? What if I build it and hate it? What if you don't build it and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? The question hung in the air like smoke from the barbecue grill. Around us, the party continued, people laughing and eating and enjoying the perfect Saturday afternoon. But at our little table, something more serious was happening. A moment of truth that felt bigger than house construction or loan applications. Let me ask you something, I said to Sarah. If this is such a good idea, if you really believe I can do it, would you be willing to put your money where your mouth is? What do you mean? I mean, would you invest in it? Not just advice and encouragement, but actual money? Sarah didn't hesitate. Yes. You don't even know how much we're talking about. Doesn't matter. If you're serious about this, if you're really willing to take the leap, then yes, I'd invest in your project. Bob whistled softly. Well, that escalated quickly. I stared at Sarah, trying to read her expression. You're serious. Dead serious. I've been looking for investment opportunities that actually mean something. Projects that create value beyond just financial returns. Building a custom home, especially one designed and constructed by someone who really cares about the work. That's exactly the kind of thing I want to be involved with. The music from the band seemed to fade into the background as I processed what was happening. 20 minutes ago, I'd been making small talk at a barbecue. Now I was discussing a business partnership with someone who barely knew me, but somehow believed in me more than I believed in myself. This is crazy, I said. The best things usually are, Sarah replied. Bob stood up and brushed off his jeans. Well, you two have some things to figure out. But if you're serious about that land, I can put you in touch with the owner. And Sarah, if you need an engineer to consult on the project, I'd be happy to help. After he walked away, Sarah and I sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower behind the oak trees. The party was winding down, people beginning to collect their things and say their goodbyes. Are we really talking about doing this? I asked finally. I think we are. Sarah smiled, but there was something serious in her eyes. The question is, are you ready to stop fixing other people's problems and start building your own solution? It was the boldest question anyone had ever asked me, and the scariest, because saying yes would mean leaving the safety of routine service calls and steady paychecks. It would mean believing in myself enough to risk everything on a dream that had lived in the back of my mind for years. But looking at Sarah, seeing the genuine faith in her expression, I realized that some questions answer themselves. "Yeah," I said. "I think I'm ready." The first person to hear about my house-building plan was my sister Elena, and her reaction wasn't exactly what I'd hoped for. "You're going to what?" she said, pausing mid-chop while making dinner in her kitchen. Elena was 3 years older than me, a nurse practitioner with 2 teenagers and a husband who sold insurance. She'd been looking out for me since Dad died, whether I wanted her to or not. "Build a house. On 5 acres south of town. Sarah Coleman is going to help finance it." Elena set down her knife and turned to face me fully. "David, honey, who is Sarah Coleman, and why is she giving you money?" "She's a financial advisor. I fixed her sink a couple weeks ago, and we got to talking. She thinks it's a good investment opportunity." "A financial advisor who you met fixing her sink wants to invest in your dream house." Elena's voice had that tone she used when one of her kids came home with a story that didn't quite add up. "Does this sound remotely realistic to you?" Her husband Marcus looked up from helping their daughter with homework at the kitchen table. "What kind of investment are we talking about here? Because unless you're planning to flip this house for profit, I don't see how someone makes money off your personal construction project." "It's not like that," I said, though I realized I hadn't actually worked out all the financial details with Sarah yet. "It's more of a partnership. She provides some of the capital, I provide the labor and expertise." "David," Elena said gently, sitting down across from me, "you're a good handyman. You're reliable, honest, hardworking. But building an entire house from scratch? That's not the same as fixing sinks and replacing water heaters. I know that. Do you? Because this sounds like someone talked you into something that's way over your head. And I don't want to see you lose everything chasing some impossible dream." The conversation went on for another 20 minutes, with Elena pointing out all the ways the project could go wrong, and Marcus asking practical questions about permits, inspections, and building codes that I couldn't answer yet. By the time I left their house, I was beginning to wonder if they were right to be worried. The doubt followed me to work the next morning, where I had 3 service calls scheduled before noon. The first was at the Rodriguez house, where a bathroom faucet had started spraying water in directions it wasn't designed for. Mrs. Rodriguez met me at the door with coffee and immediate enthusiasm. "David, perfect timing. My sister's coming to visit next week, and I can't have her seeing the bathroom looking like a crime scene." I got to work on the faucet, which needed a new cartridge and some patient coaxing to align properly. Mrs. Rodriguez hovered nearby, chatting about her sister's visit and asking about my other projects. "You know, my neighbor mentioned you might be building your own house," she said as I tested the water pressure. "Is that true?" "Still in the planning stages," I said carefully. "That's wonderful. Roberto and I have been talking about adding a deck to the back of the house. Maybe when you're done with your place, you could give us an estimate." The second call was at the Henderson house on Maple Street, where their garbage disposal had decided to stop working entirely. Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker with strong opinions about everything, had different thoughts about my construction plans. "House building, huh?" he said, watching me disconnect the disposal unit. "You got a contractor's license for that kind of work?" "I'm looking into it. Because the county's real strict about permits and inspections. My brother-in-law tried to add a room to his house without proper permits, and they made him tear the whole thing down. Cost him $15,000 and 6 months of headaches. I'll make sure everything's done properly," Mr. Henderson snorted. "That's what everyone says until they get in over their heads. You ask me, stick to what you know. There's good money in repair work and it's steady. Building houses is for people, with construction companies and crews of workers." By the time I finished the disposal replacement, Mr. Henderson had shared 3 more stories about construction projects gone wrong, each one more dire than the last. I left his house feeling like I'd been lectured by my high school guidance counselor about the dangers of unrealistic career expectations. The third call was at a new address, a small ranch house on Pine Street where a young couple had just moved in. The woman who answered the door was probably in her late 20s, with paint-stained clothes and an exhausted but happy expression. "You must be David. I'm Jessica Wu. Thanks for coming so quickly." She led me to the kitchen, where water was dripping steadily from under the sink cabinet. "We just closed on the house last week, and apparently the home inspector missed a few things." I got to work on what turned out to be a straightforward fix, a loose connection that had worked itself free over time. While I worked, Jessica told me about their plans for the house, the renovations they were hoping to tackle room by room. "It's our first house," she said with obvious pride. "We looked at new construction, but there was something appealing about taking an older place and making it our own. Plus, we couldn't afford anything in those new developments." "This is a solid house," I said, examining the plumbing connections. "Good bones, just need some attention." "That's exactly what our realtor said. My husband thinks I'm crazy for wanting to do so much work, but I love the idea of building something together. Making it ours, you know?" After I finished the repair, Jessica walked me to the door. "I heard from our neighbor that you might be building your own place. That's so exciting. Are you nervous about it?" "A little," I admitted. "I bet. But think about how amazing it'll be when you're done. Something you designed and built with your own hands. That has to be the ultimate dream for someone in your line of work." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I left the Woo House feeling better than I had all morning. But that mood didn't last long, because my next stop was the hardware store, where Pete Henderson was manning the register and had apparently already heard about my plans. "Building a house, huh?" Pete said as he rang up the faucet parts I needed for my afternoon calls. "That's ambitious." Word travels fast in this town. Small place, big dreams. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you know what you're getting into. Pete handed me my change and leaned on the counter. "You know, I've been selling building supplies for 32 years. I've seen a lot of people start projects they couldn't finish. I'm not most people. I'm sure you're not. But house building's different from repair work. When you're fixing someone else's problem, worst-case scenario is you have to come back and try again. When you're building from scratch, mistakes cost real money. Your money." I was about to respond when another customer came up behind me, and Pete turned his attention to them. But as I walked out of the store, I could feel him watching me with the expression of someone who'd seen this story before and knew how it usually ended. The afternoon brought 2 more service calls and 2 more conversations about my building plans. At the Morrison house, where I was replacing a broken light fixture, Mrs. Morrison offered to connect me with her nephew who worked for the county planning department. At the Chen house on Birch Street, no relation despite the shared name, Mr. Chen peppered me with questions about foundation work and soil testing that made me realize how much I still needed to learn. By 5 o'clock, my head was spinning with advice, warnings, encouragement, and doubt. It seemed like everyone in Millbrook had an opinion about my project, and no 2 opinions were the same. Some people thought it was a great idea, others thought it was financial suicide, and most fell somewhere in between. I was sitting in my truck outside the Chen house, trying to process everything I'd heard that day when my phone rang. Sarah's number appeared on the caller ID. "How was your first day as a future homebuilder?" she asked. "Overwhelming. I think I've talked to more people about construction today than I have in the past month combined." "Good news or bad news?" "Both. Mrs. Rodriguez wants me to build her a deck when I'm done. Mr. Henderson thinks I should stick to fixing toilets. And Pete at the hardware store looked at me like I was about to drive off a cliff." Sarah laughed. "Sounds about right. People always have opinions about other people's dreams. The question is, how do you feel about it?" I thought about that for a moment, watching kids ride bikes on the sidewalk while their parents worked in front yards. Scared, excited, confused, sometimes all 3 at the same time. That sounds like the right combination for someone about to do something important. Elena thinks I'm crazy. She's probably right. Elena's your sister? Yeah, she's worried I'm getting in over my head with someone I barely know. I paused. She might have a point about that part. She might. But getting in over your head is sometimes the only way to find out how deep you can swim. There was something in Sarah's voice that made me think she was speaking from experience. "What about you? Are you having second thoughts about investing in a handyman's pipe dream?" "Not even close. But I do think we need to sit down and work out some details. Make sure we're both clear about what we're getting into." "When did you want to do that?" "How about tonight? I could make dinner and we could spread out some papers, do some real planning, make it feel less like a dream and more like a project." The invitation caught me off guard. All our previous interactions had been professional, or at least had the excuse of business behind them. Having dinner at her house felt like crossing a line into something more personal. "You don't have to cook for me," I said. "I want to. Besides, I make a mean lasagna, and we're going to need energy for all the planning we have to do." An hour later, I was back on Oak Ridge Drive, this time carrying a bottle of wine I'd picked up at the grocery store and feeling underdressed despite wearing the same khakis and button-down shirt from the fundraiser. Sarah answered the door in jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. Perfect timing. The lasagna just came out of the oven. She led me to the kitchen, where the table was set for two and covered with manila folders, legal pads, and what looked like financial documents. The smell of garlic and cheese filled the air, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything since a hurried sandwich at lunch. "This looks incredible," I said, setting the wine on the counter. "My grandmother's recipe. She claimed it could solve any problem, from heartbreak to bankruptcy." We filled our plates and sat down at the table, but instead of diving into the paperwork, we talked about our days. Sarah told me about a difficult client who wanted to invest his entire retirement savings in cryptocurrency, and I shared the mixed reactions I'd gotten from neighbors and customers about the house project. "You know," Sarah said, twirling pasta around her fork, "I've been thinking about what your sister said, about me being someone you barely know. What about it? She's not wrong. We've had, 4 real conversations? And now I'm offering to invest in your biggest dream. From the outside, that probably looks either crazy or suspicious." I set down my fork. "Are you backing out?" "No. But I think you deserve to know why I'm doing this." "Why does it matter to me?" She got up and walked to the window, looking out at her backyard where string lights still hung from Saturday's party. "I've been successful by most people's standards. I've got money, a nice house, respect in the community, but I've also played it safe my entire life. Conservative investments, predictable choices, minimal risk. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not. But it's also not living. When I met you, when I watched you work on my sink, I saw something I haven't seen in a long time. Passion. Pride in your work. Someone who cares more about doing things right than doing them fast or cheap." She turned back to face me. "I want to be part of that. I want to invest in something real, something that matters, and I want to prove to myself that I can still take a chance on something bigger than a mutual fund." The honesty in her voice made me understand that this wasn't just about my house. It was about Sarah finding a way to build something meaningful in her own life. "What if I let you down?" I asked. "What if you don't?" We spent the next 2 hours going through the paperwork Bob had given us about the land, sketching rough floor plans on legal pads, and talking through the practical realities of construction timelines and budgets. By the time we finished, I had a folder full of notes and a head full of possibilities that felt more real than any dream I'd ever had. "You know what the best part of this is?" Sarah said as we cleared the dishes. "What?" "Tomorrow, when people ask you about your house, you'll have real answers, not just dreams, but plans." She was right. For the first time since Saturday's barbecue, I felt like I knew what I was doing, or at least I knew what I needed to find out. As I drove home that night, I thought about all the opinions I'd heard that day, all the encouragement and warnings and advice, but the only voice that mattered was the one in my head, telling me that some dreams are worth the risk of failing, and for the first time in my adult life, I was ready to listen. 3 weeks into serious planning, everything fell apart on a Thursday morning when I got a call that changed everything. "David, it's Bob Henley. We need to talk. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner in 20 minutes? Something in his voice made my stomach drop. Bob wasn't the type to sound worried, and he definitely wasn't the type to request emergency breakfast meetings. I was supposed to be at the Williamson house fixing a leaky shower, but I called and rescheduled, then drove to Murphy's with a growing sense of dread. Bob was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a manila folder in front of him. His expression was grim, and he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Sit down, son. We've got a problem." I slid into the booth across from him. "What kind of problem?" "The land. The 5 acres I told you about. There's something I didn't know when I recommended it." He opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. "I did some checking with my contacts at the county, just to make sure everything was clean before you made an offer. And it turns out the property has what they call development restrictions. The previous owner applied for subdivision permits back in 2018, got turned down, and now there's a permanent easement preventing any new construction. I stared at the papers he'd spread on the table, not fully understanding what I was looking at, but recognizing the official county seal and the word denied stamped across multiple pages. What does that mean exactly? It means you can't build a house there. The land is zoned for agriculture only. No residential construction allowed, period. The words hit me like a physical blow. For 3 weeks, I'd been planning my entire future around that piece of property. Sarah and I had spent hours designing a house layout that would fit perfectly on those 5 acres. I'd already started researching contractors for the foundation work and getting quotes on building materials. But the owner's trying to sell it as residential property, I said, grasping for something that would make this make sense. The owner either doesn't know about the restrictions, or he's hoping to find a buyer who doesn't ask the right questions. Either way, it's not your problem anymore. I leaned back in the booth, feeling like someone had just kicked the legs out from under my chair. So, what now? Are there other properties? Bob's expression got even more serious. That's the other problem. I spent yesterday morning on the phone with every realtor in 3 counties. There's almost nothing available in your price range that's suitable for custom construction. The market's gone crazy in the past year. Anything decent is either overpriced or already sold. How overpriced are we talking? Properties that would have gone for $90,000 2 years ago are now selling for $150,000, $160,000. And that's if you can find them. I felt something cold settling in my chest. So you're telling me this whole thing was a waste of time? I'm telling you the original plan won't work. Whether that means the whole thing is a waste of time depends on how flexible you're willing to be. Before I could ask what he meant, my phone rang. Sarah's number. I almost didn't answer, not wanting to be the one to deliver the bad news, but Bob nodded toward the phone. Answer it. She needs to know. Sarah, I'm actually meeting with Bob right now, and we've got some... David, thank God you answered. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. We have a serious problem. The urgency in her voice made me sit up straighter. What kind of problem? I just got off the phone with my business partner. Someone's been asking questions about our investment. Arrangement. Someone who knows enough about my business to make trouble. I looked at Bob, who was watching my face with concern. What kind of questions? Questions about whether I'm using client funds for personal investments. Questions about my relationship with you, about whether our business arrangement is actually legitimate or if there's something else going on. The implications hit me immediately. If Sarah's professional reputation was at risk because of our partnership, if someone was suggesting she was misusing her position as a financial advisor, then everything we'd planned was not just impractical, but potentially harmful to her career. Who's asking these questions? I don't know yet. But Marcus is concerned enough that he thinks we should put our arrangement on hold until we can figure out who's behind this and what they want. Marcus was Sarah's business partner, the co-owner of their financial advisory firm. If he was worried about the legal implications of their investment in my project, then we were dealing with something much more serious than zoning restrictions. Sarah, I'm sitting here with Bob, and we just found out the land we were planning to buy can't be used for construction anyway. Maybe this is a sign that we should... Don't say it, she interrupted. Don't say we should give up. Not yet. But if your business is at risk, my business will be fine. But I need to know if you still want to do this. Even if it means finding a completely different approach. I looked across the table at Bob, who was listening to my half of the conversation with obvious concern. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a handyman with a steady business and a simple life. Now I was caught up in something that involved zoning laws, professional ethics investigations, and someone actively working to sabotage our plans. I don't know, I said honestly. This is getting complicated in ways I never expected. Everything worth doing gets complicated, David. The question is whether you believe in what we're trying to build enough to fight for it. After we hung up, Bob and I sat in silence for several minutes. The diner was starting to fill up with the lunch crowd, farmers and retirees and people whose biggest worry was whether to order the meatloaf or the daily special. So what do you think? I asked finally. I think someone doesn't want this project to happen, Bob said. The question is why. Maybe it's just bad luck, wrong property, Wrong timing, wrong partnership. Bob shook his head. The property restrictions weren't posted publicly. I had to call in favors just to find out about them. And Sarah's business has been operating for years without anyone questioning her investment decisions. For both problems to surface at the same time, that's not coincidence. You think someone's deliberately trying to stop us? I think someone sees your project as a threat to something, though I can't imagine what that would be. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on normal work, but my mind kept drifting back to the conversation at Murphy's. I fixed a garbage disposal for the Hendricks family, replaced a bathroom faucet for Mrs. Patterson, and installed new cabinet hinges for a young couple on Pine Street. Normal problems with normal solutions, the kind of work that had filled my days for 8 years. But now the routine felt different, smaller somehow, like I'd gotten a taste of something bigger and couldn't go back to being satisfied with service calls and repair bills. That evening, I drove out to the property Bob had originally recommended, the 5 acres that were supposed to become the foundation of my custom home. It was beautiful land, rolling and wooded, with a small creek running through the back section. I could see exactly where the house would have gone, positioned to catch the morning sun and shelter from the winter wind. Standing there in the fading light, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my father died. The deep ache of loss. Not just disappointment, but genuine grief for something that would never exist. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Can you come over? I found something you need to see." 20 minutes later, I was back in Sarah's kitchen, where she had her laptop open and papers spread across the table. She looked tired, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from spending a day fighting battles you didn't expect to fight. "I did some digging into who might be asking questions about our business arrangement," she said without preamble. "And I found something interesting." She turned the laptop screen toward me. It showed a website for a local real estate development company called Millbrook Properties LLC. The homepage featured photos of upscale housing developments and commercial projects throughout the county. So, look at the recent projects section. I scrolled down to a series of photos showing a new subdivision called Oak Ridge Estates. Large houses on manicured lots, all variations of the same colonial style, with a sign advertising, starting in the low 400s. "I still don't see—" "Look at the location." She clicked on a map link, and I saw immediately what she was getting at. Oak Ridge Estates was being built less than 2 miles from the property Bob had recommended to us, the same property that had supposedly been restricted from residential development. "Wait," I said slowly. "If that land has development restrictions, how are they building houses right next to it?" That's what I wondered. So I called the county planning office and asked some very specific questions. Turns out the restrictions on your property were put in place specifically to preserve the rural character of the area around Oak Ridge Estates. The pieces started falling into place. So they restricted our land to protect the value of their development. It gets better. Guess who owns Millbrook Properties LLC? She clicked to the company's About Us page, and I found myself looking at a professional headshot of someone I recognized. Marcus Webb, Sarah's business partner. Marcus owns the development company? Not directly. It's owned by a holding company. That's owned by another company that eventually traces back to Marcus and his wife. I had to dig through 3 layers of corporate filings to figure it out. I stared at the screen, trying to process what this meant. So Marcus has been working against our project because it would compete with his housing development? Not just compete. If word got out that quality custom homes could be built in this area for a fraction of what he's charging for those cookie-cutter colonials, it would hurt his entire business model. And he's been asking questions about your investment in my project to make you back out. Or to damage my reputation enough that I can't afford to be associated with anything that might threaten his interests. The betrayal in Sarah's voice was unmistakable. Marcus wasn't just her business partner. He was someone she'd trusted with her professional reputation and financial future. Finding out he'd been working against her behind the scenes had to feel like a knife in the back. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Legally, he hasn't done anything wrong. Ethically." She closed the laptop and rubbed her eyes. "That's a different story. Sarah, maybe this is a sign that we should just walk away, find a different project, a different partnership, something that doesn't put your business at risk." She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. something fierce and determined that reminded me she hadn't built a successful financial advisory practice by backing down from challenges. David, let me ask you something. When you fix a problem for someone, what do you do when you run into unexpected complications? I figure out a different approach. Exactly. You don't give up, you adapt. You find another way to solve the problem. But this isn't just about finding another piece of land. Your business partner is actively working against us. Your professional reputation could be damaged. That's not a complication, that's a disaster. Only if we let it be. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at her backyard where we'd first talked about taking risks and building something meaningful. Marcus thinks he can intimidate me into abandoning this project. He thinks I'll choose safety over principle. And will you? She turned back to me, and I saw something in her expression that made me understand why she'd been successful in a competitive field like financial planning. Not a chance. In fact, this just convinced me that we need to do this project more than ever. Even if it means fighting your own business partner? Especially if it means fighting my own business partner. Because if we don't, he wins. And people like Marcus always win when good people decide it's too risky to fight. The conviction in her voice was contagious, and for the first time since Bob's phone call that morning, I felt something other than defeat. So what's the plan? Sarah smiled, and I recognized the expression of someone who just decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense. First, we find new land. There has to be property somewhere in this county that's suitable for construction and not controlled by Marcus Webb. Second, we document everything we've learned about his interference and make sure the right people know about his conflicts of interest. And third, we build you the best damn house this county has ever seen. Not because it's a good investment, not because it makes financial sense, but because some things are worth fighting for. Looking at Sarah in that moment, seeing the determination in her face and the steel in her voice, I realized that this project had become about more than just building a house. It had become about proving that ordinary people could still take extraordinary risks and win. All right, I said, let's fight. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose I hadn't felt since deciding to build the house in the first place. But this time, instead of planning construction schedules, I was planning an investigation. Sarah had texted me the night before with an address and a time, 8 a.m. at the county courthouse, where we were going to start digging into Marcus Webb's business dealings. I arrived to find Sarah already there, standing on the courthouse steps with a thermos of coffee and a determined expression. She was dressed in what I was beginning to recognize as her business armor, a sharp gray suit that made her look like someone you didn't want to mess with. Ready to become a detective? She asked, handing me a cup of coffee. As ready as a guy who fixes sinks can be for corporate espionage. Good, because I spent half the night researching property records, and what I found is going to make you angry. The county clerk's office was a maze of filing cabinets and computer terminals manned by civil servants who looked like they'd been there since the building was constructed. Sarah seemed to know exactly where to go and who to ask for, navigating the bureaucracy with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. We need to pull all the property records for the Oak Ridge area from the past 5 years, she told the clerk, a middle-aged woman named Dorothy who treated every request like a personal favor. That's a lot of paperwork, honey. You sure you need all of it? All of it, Sarah confirmed, sliding a $20 bill across the counter. And we'll need copies of any zoning change applications, development permits, and environmental impact studies. 2 hours later, we were sitting in Sarah's car in the courthouse parking lot, surrounded by manila folders and legal documents. What we'd found painted a picture of systematic manipulation that was even worse than we'd suspected. Look at this timeline, Sarah said, spreading several documents across the dashboard. Marcus's company applied for development permits for Oak Ridge Estates in March 2019. The property restrictions on your land were put in place 6 months later, in September 2019. So he blocked our land after he'd already started planning his development. It gets worse. Look at the environmental impact study for his project. She handed me a thick document filled with scientific language I didn't understand. According to this, the Oak Ridge Estates development was supposed to include affordable housing units to qualify for county tax incentives. I flipped through the pages, looking for something that made sense. How many affordable units? 40% of the total development. That's about 60 houses that were supposed to be priced for working families. She pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. But if you look at the current sales information on their website, the cheapest house they're offering starts at $400,000. That's not exactly affordable for most people in Millbrook. No, it's not. And I'm betting if we dig deeper, we'll find that Marcus got the tax breaks for promising affordable housing, then found a way to get out of actually building it. The more we read, the clearer the pattern became. Marcus Webb wasn't just a businessman trying to protect his investment. He was someone who'd built his success on manipulating the system, taking advantage of loopholes and technicalities to maximize profit while minimizing his obligations to the community. So what do we do with this information? I asked. We keep digging, and we start making phone calls to people who might be interested in what we've found. Our next stop was the office of the Millbrook Gazette, the weekly newspaper that covered local politics and community events. The editor, a woman named Carol Martinez who looked like she'd been fighting small-town corruption since before I was born, listened to our story with the intense focus of someone who smelled a real scandal. "Let me get this straight," Carol said, leaning back in her chair. Marcus Webb used his position on the Planning Commission to block competing development while securing tax breaks for his own project based on promises he never intended to keep. "That's what the documents suggest," Sarah said, sliding a folder across Carol's desk. Carol spent 10 minutes reviewing the paperwork, occasionally making notes and asking clarifying questions. When she finished, she looked up with the expression of a reporter who just found her next front-page story. "This is good stuff. Really good stuff. But I'm going to need more than property records and permit applications. I need someone willing to go on the record about how this affected them personally." Sarah and I looked at each other. Going public meant there would be no backing down, no quiet resolution that let everyone save face. It meant declaring war on one of the most influential businessmen in the county. "I'll do it," I said before I could talk myself out of it. "If it helps expose what he's been doing, I'll go on the record." "You sure about that?" Carol asked. "Marcus Webb has lawyers, and he's not afraid to use them. Speaking out against him could get expensive for you." "Not speaking out is more expensive," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "This isn't just about my house anymore. It's about whether people like Marcus get to decide who gets opportunities and who doesn't." Carol smiled and pulled out a digital recorder. "All right, Mr. Chen, let's start from the beginning." The interview took an hour, with Carol asking detailed questions about my interactions with Sarah, our plans for the house, and how Marcus's interference had affected those plans. When we finished, she promised to have a story ready for next week's edition, assuming she could verify the information we'd provided. "One more thing," Carol said as we prepared to leave. "You might want to be prepared for Marcus to fight back. Men like him don't like being exposed, and they usually have ways of making trouble for people who cross them." Her warning proved prophetic sooner than expected. That afternoon, while I was replacing a water heater for an elderly couple on Elm Street, I got a call from Elena. "David, what the hell is going on?" "I just got a call from some guy claiming to be a journalist, asking questions about your business practices and whether you're licensed for the work you're doing." "What kind of questions?" "Questions about whether you pull proper permits, whether you're bonded and insured, whether you've ever done work that didn't meet code." He seemed to know a lot about your business for someone who supposedly just heard about you. I finished connecting the water heater and stepped outside to continue the conversation. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to go to hell and hung up." "But David, who is this guy? And why is he asking questions that sound like he's trying to get you in trouble?" Before I could answer, my phone beeped with another call. Mrs. Rodriguez, sounding upset. "David, I hate to bother you, but I just had a very strange conversation with someone from the county building department. They're saying there might be problems with the work you did on my bathroom faucet last month." "What kind of problems?" "Something about permits and inspections." I told them it was just a faucet replacement, but they seem to think it might require some kind of official approval. They want to send an inspector out next week. I thanked Mrs. Rodriguez and promised to look into it, then immediately called Sarah. "He's fighting back," I said when she answered. "Marcus is having people investigate my business, trying to find violations or problems he can use against me." I was expecting something like this. "Are you worried?" "About my business? No. I've always done everything by the book. But Elena's scared, and Mrs. Rodriguez is confused, and I hate that other people are getting dragged into this because of decisions I made." "David, listen to me. This is exactly what Marcus wants. He wants you to feel guilty about the collateral damage, to worry that fighting him will hurt the people you care about. That's how bullies win. So what do? We document everything. Every phone call, every inspection, every attempt to intimidate you or your customers. And we keep pushing forward with our original plan. Speaking of which, Bob called earlier. He thinks he might have found another property. Where? About 15 miles south of town. 10 acres instead of 5, but the price is similar. He's checking on the zoning and deed restrictions now. That's great news. What's the catch? It's farther from town than we originally planned, and it'll need a longer driveway, which means more site preparation costs. But it's doable? According to Bob, yes. He's setting up a time for us to look at it this weekend. That evening I drove out to look at the new property Bob had found. It was more remote than the original site, accessible only by a gravel road that wound through farmland and wooded sections. But when I reached the property line, I understood why Bob thought it might work. The land was beautiful in a different way than the first site. More open, with rolling meadows and mature oak trees scattered across gentle hills. There was already a well and electrical service from a previous owner who'd planned to build but never followed through. And most importantly, it was far enough from Marcus Webb's development to be outside his sphere of influence. Standing there in the evening light, I could envision the house Sarah and I had designed sitting perfectly on a rise that overlooked the southern meadow. The workshop I'd dreamed about could go near the tree line, with easy access but enough separation to muffle noise. It wasn't the same as the original site, but it had its own appeal. My phone rang, interrupting my planning. Sarah's number. How does the new property look? Different, but good. I think it could work even better than the first site. Excellent. Because I just got off the phone with Carol Martinez, and she's found some additional information about Marcus's business dealings that makes our situation look even worse than we thought. Worse how? Remember those affordable housing units that were supposed to be part of Oak Ridge Estates? Carol found out what happened to them. Marcus got the tax breaks by claiming he would build affordable housing. Then he transferred the obligation to a subsidiary company that immediately declared bankruptcy. So he got the tax benefits without actually building the affordable housing. Exactly. And he's done it before, on at least 3 other developments in different counties. It's basically a scam he's been running for years. The implications were staggering. Marcus hadn't just interfered with our project. He'd been systematically defrauding taxpayers while driving up housing costs for working families throughout the region. Carol wants to expand her story into a full investigation, Sarah continued. But she needs more sources, more documentation, and she needs people who've been personally affected by Marcus's schemes. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we need to find other people Marcus has screwed over. Contractors who lost bids to his companies, families who couldn't afford houses because of artificially inflated prices, communities that lost promised affordable housing. It was ambitious. Maybe too ambitious for a handyman and a financial advisor who'd started out just wanting to build a house. But as I stood on that hillside, looking out over land that could become the foundation of something meaningful, I realized that some fights choose you, whether you're ready for them or not. All right, I said. Let's find them. The next 3 days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and document reviews. Sarah used her professional connections to track down people who'd had dealings with Marcus's various companies. I reached out to contractors and tradesmen who might have encountered his business practices firsthand. What we found was a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond interference with housing developments. Marcus Webb had built his business empire by systematically exploiting regulations, manipulating bidding processes, and using his political connections to eliminate competition. I never could prove anything, Tom told us during a meeting at his house. But every time my son's company was the low bidder on a county project, somehow Marcus's people would come in at the last minute with an even lower bid. Then, after they got the contract, they'd find reasons to charge cost overruns that ended up making their projects more expensive than my son's original bid. Why didn't you report it? We tried. But Marcus had friends on the county commission, friends in the planning department, friends everywhere that mattered. My son filed complaints, but they all got buried in bureaucracy until it was too late to matter. By the end of the week, we had testimony from 8 different people who'd been affected by Marcus's business practices. Carol Martinez was putting together what she called the biggest local corruption story in 20 years. and Bob had confirmed that the new property was completely clear of any development restrictions or zoning issues. "You know what the best part of this is?" Sarah said as we sat in her kitchen, reviewing our progress. "What? We're actually going to build your house. Despite everything Marcus tried to do to stop us, despite all the obstacles and complications, we're going to make this happen." She was right. In all the chaos of investigating Marcus and fighting his attempts at intimidation, the original dream had evolved into something bigger and more meaningful. We weren't just building a house anymore. We were proving that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win. "When do we start construction?" "Bob thinks we can break ground in 6 weeks, assuming the soil tests come back clean and we can get the permits filed." Sarah smiled. "Think you're ready to trade in your service? Calls for full-time construction work?" I looked around her kitchen, remembering the first time I'd come here to fix a simple sink problem. That morning, I'd been a handyman with a steady business and simple goals. Now, I was about to become a home builder, an anti-corruption crusader, and apparently someone willing to fight powerful people for the sake of principle. "I'm ready," I said. And for the first time since this whole adventure started, I truly was. 4 months later, I stood on the covered porch of my completed house, watching the sunrise paint the southern meadow in shades of gold and amber. The coffee in my hand was still steaming, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I had nowhere urgent to be. No service calls, no emergency repairs, no problems that needed solving before someone else's day could continue. The house behind me was everything I'd dreamed it would be, and more. 2 bedrooms, an open-plan kitchen and living area, and a workshop that was bigger than my old apartment. Every board, every nail, every fixture had been chosen and installed with the kind of care that comes from building something that will last generations. But the real victory wasn't the house itself. It was what had happened to Marcus Webb. Carol. Martinez's exposé had hit like a bomb. The web of corruption, how one developer rigged the system, ran as a 5-part series that was picked up by newspapers across the state. The FBI opened an investigation into his business practices. The county commission launched its own inquiry, and 3 of his ongoing developments were put on hold pending review. Marcus tried to fight back, hiring expensive lawyers and PR firms to manage the crisis. But when 8 different victims came forward with similar stories of fraud and manipulation, when bank records confirmed suspicious financial transfers, and when former employees started talking to investigators, his carefully constructed empire began to crumble. The county attorney filed criminal charges 2 weeks ago. Marcus Webb was facing potential prison time for fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of public office. His development company was bankrupt, Oak Ridge Estates was being sold to cover debts, and the affordable housing units he'd promised were finally going to be built under court supervision. But this morning, sitting on my porch with my coffee, I wasn't thinking about Marcus Webb. I was thinking about the sound of Sarah's car coming up the gravel driveway, and the fact that she'd started spending more nights here than at her own house in town. "Morning, builder," she called out as she climbed the porch steps, carrying 2 grocery bags and wearing the kind of smile that had become my favorite part of every day. "Morning, investor," I replied, standing to help her with the bags. "Ready for the grand tour?" Today was the official housewarming party, the celebration we'd been planning since the foundation was poured. Friends, neighbors, family, and everyone who'd supported us through the chaos of the past year were coming to see what we'd built together. "I still can't believe you finished it on time and under budget," Sarah said as we carried the groceries inside. "Do you know how rare that is in construction?" I had good help and excellent financial oversight. The kitchen island where we set the bags was solid oak, handcrafted by a local woodworker who'd become a friend during the building process. The morning light streamed through windows positioned to catch the sunrise while blocking the harsh afternoon heat. Every detail had been planned, tested, and refined until it was exactly right. "Elena's bringing the cake," Sarah said, unpacking vegetables for the afternoon's barbecue. She still can't believe her little brother built this place. Elena had become one of our biggest supporters once she saw the quality of work I was capable of. More importantly, she'd seen how the project had changed me, given me a confidence and sense of purpose that service calls had never provided. "What time are people supposed to start arriving?" 2 o'clock. But knowing this crowd, they'll start showing up around 1:30. Sarah paused in her unpacking to look around the kitchen. "You know what I love most about this place?" "What?" It feels like home. Not like a showplace or an investment property. Like a place where people actually live and work and build their lives. That had been the goal from the beginning. Not just to build a house, but to create a home that reflected the values of craftsmanship and authenticity that had guided every decision along the way. The first guests arrived at exactly 1:30, just as Sarah had predicted. Bob Henley came with his wife Martha and a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for the occasion. Tom Bradley brought his son, the former contractor who'd started his own business again after Marcus's downfall freed up the local construction market. By 2:30, the yard was full of people, and the house was buzzing with conversations about everything from foundation techniques to kitchen cabinet design. Carol Martinez interviewed several guests for a follow-up story about community resilience and the power of standing up to corruption. "I have to admit," Elena said, finding me on the back deck where I was manning the grill, "I was wrong about this whole project. This isn't just a nice house. It's proof that good people can still win when they work together." "It took a village," I said, flipping burgers while keeping an eye on the crowd scattered across the property. "It took courage," she corrected. "Yours and Sarah's. Most people would have given up when things got complicated." Dr. Williams from the hospital wandered over with a plate of food and questions about the solar panels we'd installed on the south-facing roof. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her sister to see the house she'd heard so much about. Even Pete Henderson from the hardware store showed up, admitting that he'd been wrong about the project's chances for success. "You proved me wrong, David," Pete said, shaking my hand with genuine respect. "This is quality work, and you did it the right way. Your father would be proud." The comment hit me harder than I'd expected. Dad had been gone for 10 years, but I could feel his presence in every carefully squared corner and properly installed fixture. This house was built with the principles he'd taught me. Do it right, do it once, and take pride in the work. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself standing in groups of people discussing construction techniques, sharing stories about the building process, and answering questions about future projects. Because there would be future projects. The success of this house had generated interest from other potential clients who wanted custom homes built with the same attention to detail and craftsmanship. "So what's next?" asked Margaret Chen from the food bank, who'd been following the project since the beginning. "We've got 3 potential clients who want to start planning their own custom homes," Sarah said, appearing at my elbow with a fresh beer. "And Bob's been talking about developing a small cluster of affordable housing units using similar design principles." "Affordable housing?" "The real kind," I said. "Not the fake promises Marcus Webb used to make, but actual houses that working. Families can afford to buy. Built well, designed efficiently, priced fairly." It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious for someone who'd been in the construction business for less than a year. But the past few months had taught me that ambitious wasn't the same as impossible, especially when you had the right partners and the right motivation. The party continued until well after sunset, with people reluctant to leave the warmth and camaraderie that had filled the property all day. Children played in the yard while adults lingered on the porch, talking about everything from local politics to woodworking techniques. Finally, as the last guests departed and Sarah and I were cleaning up the remnants of the celebration, we found ourselves alone on the front porch where this whole adventure had really begun. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day in your kitchen?" I asked, settling into one of the rocking chairs I'd built during the final weeks of construction. "Which part?" "I said a lot of things that day." "You said that at 55. You'd never met someone who worked so hard for something so straightforward. You made it sound like there was something unusual about caring enough to do a job properly." Sarah laughed, taking the chair next to mine. "I still think there is. Most people do the minimum required to get paid and move on. You do the work like it matters." "It does matter. All of it matters." We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the countryside and watching stars appear in the clear sky above us. In the distance, the lights of Millbrook twinkled like scattered diamonds, reminding us of the community that had supported us through every challenge and setback. "You know what the best part of today was?" Sarah said eventually. "What?" "Watching you talk about the next projects. Seeing how excited you get when you describe your vision for affordable housing. You found your calling, David. Not just as a builder, but as someone who can create solutions that actually matter." She was right. Somewhere between fixing that first sink and breaking ground on this house, I'd discovered that building things was different from repairing them. Repair. Work was about solving problems, but construction was about creating possibilities. It was about taking raw materials and human effort and turning them into something that could shelter families and anchor communities for decades to come. What about you? I asked. Any regrets about getting involved with a risky investment and a stubborn handyman? Only one, she said with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. What's that? I regret that it took me 55 years to find someone who works as hard as you do. And I regret waiting so long to take a real risk on something that mattered. Looking at Sarah in the moonlight, I realized that this house was just the beginning. We'd built more than a home together. We'd built a partnership based on shared values and mutual respect. We'd proven that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win. And we'd discovered that the best investments aren't always financial. So, what do we do now? I asked. Now we build the next house. And the one after that. And we keep proving that quality and integrity still matter in a world that's forgotten how to value them. The wind picked up, rustling the oak trees that surrounded our property, and carrying the scent of the wild roses that had started growing along the fence line. This land, this house, this life we'd built together was everything I'd dreamed of and more. But the real victory wasn't in the lumber and stone and carefully crafted joints. It was in the knowledge that we'd taken on powerful people who thought they could control other people's opportunities, and we'd won. We'd shown that honest work and stubborn principles could triumph over corruption and intimidation. Most importantly, we'd proven that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible, especially then. As we finally headed inside, I took one last look at the house that had started as a dream and become a symbol of everything I believed about work, integrity, and the power of people who refused to give up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to build something meaningful. But tonight, sitting on the porch of a house I'd built with my own hands, surrounded by the community I'd chosen and the woman who'd believed in me before I believed in myself, I finally understood what my father had been trying to teach me all those years ago. How you do anything is how you do everything. And if you're going to build something, you might as well build it to last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.